Hi, I'm Emma. My mother-in-law called me a gold digger for 2 years, convinced I married her son for his promising future and family connections. What she didn't know was that my late mother's name was carved in marble on the hospital wing, where she'd eventually need emergency surgery. When Linda Richardson saw the Catherine Williams Memorial Pediatric Wing and realized Williams was my maiden name, her face went whiter than her Botox appointments. Want to know what happened when she discovered her poor daughter-in-law's family had donated $15 million to that hospital? And who came crawling with apologies they'd never offered before? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought silence could be a weapon until I learned to wield it like my mother once did. Growing up, as Catherine Williams' daughter taught me that true power whispers while insecurity shouts. My mother never flaunted our family's wealth, never dropped names or demanded recognition. She believed that good deeds should echo in the lives they touched, not in society pages. I inherited her quiet strength, her belief that character matters more than credit scores, and, apparently, her ability to completely blindside people who judge books by their deliberately modest covers. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Charlotte. I was pulling into the parking lot of East Charlotte Community Health Clinic, sipping lukewarm coffee from my trusty travel mug, and mentally preparing for another day of caring for patients who couldn't afford fancy medical practices. My Honda Civic looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, the car of a hardworking nurse practitioner who chose to serve the underserved rather than chase higher-paying positions at prestigious hospitals. What it didn't look like was the car of someone who could buy the entire clinic without touching her trust fund. I loved my work. Every morning brought families who needed someone to listen, to care, to treat their children with the same attention they'd receive at the most expensive private practices in Myers Park. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her daughter Sophia in for asthma checks. Marcus Thompson needed his diabetes managed on a shoestring budget. These weren't just patients. They were reminders of why I became a nurse in the first place. My mother used to say that privilege without purpose was just expensive emptiness. Working at this clinic gave my life purpose in ways that country club brunches and charity galas never could. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was living more authentically in my modest townhouse in South End than I ever had growing up on the Williams estate in Davidson. That sprawling lakefront property with its pristine gardens and boat dock felt like a museum of someone else's life now. I kept it maintained through the family foundation, but I rarely visited. Too many memories of my mother's laugh echoing through rooms that felt too large for the love they contained after she was gone. Jake understood my need for simplicity, or at least he tried to. We'd met at Sarah's housewarming party 3 years ago, and I was immediately drawn to his genuine laugh and the way he talked about his job at the tech company without trying to impress anyone. He didn't ask about my family's money because he didn't know there was any to ask about. I introduced myself as Emma Williams, nurse practitioner, and left it at that. For the first time in my adult life, someone was getting to know me for who I was, not what I represented or inherited. Our relationship blossomed naturally. Coffee dates at small cafes in Noda, hiking at Crowder's Mountain, movie nights in my studio apartment where we'd order pizza and debate whether superhero movies were getting too complicated. Jake never questioned why I insisted on splitting checks or why I drove a Honda instead of something flashier. He respected my independence, assumed I was budget conscious like most healthcare workers, and fell in love with the woman I actually was, rather than the heiress I was hiding. When he proposed, it was perfect in its simplicity. No expensive restaurant, no photographer lurking in bushes. Just Jake, me, and a sunset at Freedom Park, with a ring he'd saved for months to buy. I said yes because I loved him, because he made me laugh, because he saw value in my work at the clinic instead of suggesting I find something more prestigious. I said yes because he was the first person who loved Emma the nurse practitioner, not Emma the Williams heiress. Meeting his family should have been a joyful milestone. Jake had always spoken fondly of his parents, Bob and Linda Richardson, and his sister Ashley. He described family dinners filled with laughter, Bob's terrible dad jokes, Linda's elaborate holiday decorations, Ashley's dramatic stories about her life as a lawyer's wife. I was nervous but excited to become part of a close-knit family, especially since my own had become so small after my mother's death. The first warning sign appeared during our initial dinner at their house in Myers Park. Linda had clearly spent considerable time preparing, and the dining room table was set with her best china and crystal. I arrived with homemade brownies, a bottle of wine, and genuine enthusiasm about getting to know Jake's family. Linda greeted me with a smile that seemed measured, like she was calculating something behind her eyes. Throughout dinner, the questions came like a gentle interrogation. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? How long had I been nursing? Did I have plans to advance my career? Each answer seemed to disappoint her slightly. When I mentioned that my mother had passed away when I was 16, and that I preferred working with underserved populations, I watched Linda exchange a quick glance with Ashley. It was subtle, but I caught it. Bob was kinder, asking genuine questions about my work and nodding appreciatively when I described the clinic's mission. Jake beamed as he told them about my dedication to my patients, how I often stayed late to ensure everyone received proper care. But I noticed Linda's smile becoming more strained as the evening progressed, especially when Ashley regaled us with stories about her husband's latest business acquisition and their upcoming vacation to Napa. The drive home was quiet. Jake seemed thoughtful, and when I asked if his family liked me, he assured me they did. But there was something in his voice, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I decided to give it time. First impressions could be misleading, and I was prepared to be patient with people who were important to Jake. Over the following months, as wedding planning began, the pattern became clearer. Linda had opinions about everything, but they were always framed as helpful suggestions rather than criticisms. Maybe we should consider a larger venue? Wouldn't Jake's colleagues expect something more formal? Had I thought about registering somewhere nicer than Target? Each comment felt like a paper cut, small individually but collectively drawing blood. Ashley was less subtle. During one particularly memorable brunch, she looked at my engagement ring and asked if I was planning to upgrade it later. When I said I loved it exactly as it was, she laughed and said that was sweet, but most women wanted something more substantial once their husband's career took off. The implication was clear. I was a temporary placeholder until Jake could afford someone more appropriate. I started noticing things I'd initially missed. The way Linda would redirect conversations when I talked about my work. How she'd subtly emphasize certain words when introducing me to her friends. This is Emma, Jake's fiancée. She's a nurse. The pause before nurse was barely perceptible, but it was there. The way Ashley would mention expensive purchases or exclusive events, always with a sympathetic smile, as if she understood that such things were beyond my reach. Jake defended me when he noticed, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. He loved his family and couldn't understand why they weren't embracing me the way he'd hoped. I started downplaying their comments, telling him I understood their concerns about Jake marrying someone they barely knew. I convinced him that time would fix everything, that once they got to know me better, they'd see what he saw. Our wedding was beautiful in its simplicity. We chose a small church downtown, invited close friends and family, and focused on celebrating our love rather than impressing anyone. I paid for most of it quietly, using a small portion of my trust fund but telling Jake I'd been saving for years. Linda made several comments about the modest reception, suggesting that Bob's business connections might expect something more elaborate. Ashley wondered aloud if my family would be contributing anything, since it was traditional for the bride's family to handle wedding expenses. I deflected these questions easily. My father was traveling for medical conferences, I explained. Our family preferred intimate celebrations. The truth was simpler and more complicated. Dr. Michael Williams was indeed traveling, but he'd offered to pay for any wedding I wanted. I declined because I wanted this day to belong to Jake and me, not to the Williams family legacy. I wanted to marry the man I loved, without the shadow of our family's wealth looming over the ceremony. The day itself was perfect. Pastor David, who'd known my mother and understood my desire for privacy, performed a ceremony that felt genuine and heartfelt. My closest friends from nursing school were there, along with colleagues from the clinic who'd become like family. Jake's family attended, of course, though I caught Linda whispering to relatives about the venue size and reception budget. But when Jake and I exchanged vows, none of that mattered. We were promising to build a life together based on love, respect, and shared values. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The honeymoon was a weekend in Asheville, hiking and exploring small towns in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast, ate at local diners, and talked about our future with the kind of optimism that makes everything seem possible. Jake talked about wanting to show me the world someday, maybe save up for a trip to Europe. I smiled and agreed, not mentioning that I could book us first-class tickets to anywhere tomorrow if I wanted to. Those weren't the memories I wanted to build with him. Returning to real life meant returning to family dynamics that hadn't magically improved during our absence. If anything, Linda seemed more convinced than ever that I was a poor match for her son. She began making comments about Jake's potential, how smart he was, how he deserved someone who could match his ambition. She'd mention Ashley's contributions to her husband's career, how the right wife could open doors and create opportunities. The gold digger comments started subtly. Linda would mention reading articles about women who targeted successful men, then quickly clarify that she wasn't suggesting anything, just making conversation. She'd talk about friends whose sons had married women who seemed nice enough, but were clearly motivated by financial security. Ashley would chime in with stories about women in her social circle who'd married up and were now living lifestyles they could never have afforded on their own. I began to understand that in Linda's worldview, I represented everything she feared for her son. A woman from a modest background who'd somehow convinced her brilliant, successful boy to settle for less than he deserved. She saw my nursing career not as a calling but as evidence of limited ambition. She interpreted my practical choices about cars and clothes as signs that I was already spending Jake's money irresponsibly. In her mind, I was a cautionary tale waiting to happen. The comments became more direct over time. During one family dinner, Linda suggested that I might want to consider advancing my education, maybe getting a degree that would allow me to contribute more financially to my marriage. When I mentioned that I loved my current work, she smiled tightly and said that love didn't pay bills, and marriages needed partners who could pull their weight financially. Ashley nodded sagely, adding that modern women needed to think strategically about their careers. I started dreading family gatherings. Every conversation felt like a minefield, where I had to defend choices that needed no defense. When Jake got a promotion at work, Linda made sure to point out how important it was for him to have a wife who could match his new status. When we looked at houses, she had opinions about neighborhoods and price ranges that made it clear she thought I was pushing Jake beyond his means. The worst part was watching Jake caught in the middle. He loved his family but was beginning to see their treatment of me for what it was. He'd defend me after they left, reassure me that their opinions didn't matter, promise that things would improve. But I could see the strain in his eyes, the way he'd tense up during family conversations, the careful way he'd phrase things to avoid triggering his mother's criticism. I considered telling them the truth dozens of times. It would have been so easy to invite them to the Williams estate, to casually mention my trust fund, to watch their expressions change when they realized their gold-digger daughter-in-law was worth more than their entire family combined. But something stopped me every time. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the memory of my mother's voice reminding me that money revealed character but didn't create it. Linda and Ashley's treatment of me said everything about who they were, and nothing about who I was. Instead, I doubled down on proving my worth through actions rather than bank statements. I worked extra shifts at the clinic, often staying late to help families navigate insurance issues or connect them with resources they needed. I volunteered at community health fairs, teaching blood pressure screenings and diabetes management to people who couldn't afford regular medical care. I organized fundraisers for the clinic, reaching out to local businesses and community organizations to support our mission. Jake was proud of my work, often bragging to his family about my dedication and the difference I was making in people's lives. But Linda had a way of deflating these achievements with faint praise. How nice that I was so committed to helping people. How admirable that I'd found a way to make nursing fulfilling. How important it was to feel good about one's work, even if it didn't provide significant financial security. The breaking point came during Ashley's birthday party at the Charlotte Country Club. Linda had insisted we attend, and I'd worn my nicest dress, a simple black sheath I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack. I thought I looked appropriate for the occasion, but I realized my mistake the moment we walked into the room filled with women in designer dresses and expensive jewelry. Ashley greeted us warmly enough, but I caught her giving my outfit a quick once-over before turning to gush over other guests' appearances. Linda introduced me to her friends with the same careful phrasing she always used, emphasizing my profession in a way that felt like a warning. Throughout the evening, I found myself in conversations where women discussed vacation homes, luxury purchases, and exclusive events with the casual familiarity of people who'd never had to check a price tag. I didn't feel jealous or inadequate. I felt invisible. These women weren't cruel, but they operated in a world where money created relevance, and my apparent lack of it made me forgettable. They'd ask polite questions about nursing, nod sympathetically when I mentioned working with low-income families, then immediately pivot to conversations about topics they found more engaging. The moment that changed everything happened near the end of the evening. I was standing alone by the windows overlooking the golf course when I overheard Linda talking to a group of her friends near the bar. She didn't know I was within earshot, or maybe she didn't care. "Jake's wife seems sweet," one woman said diplomatically. "Oh, Emma's lovely," Linda replied in a tone that somehow made lovely sound like a consolation prize. "She's just very different from what we'd hoped for Jake. You know how it is when successful men marry down. They think they're being noble, but they don't realize how it limits their potential." Another woman murmured something about love being important too. "Of course," Linda continued, "but love doesn't pay for the lifestyle Jake deserves." Emma's a nurse at some community clinic, very dedicated to helping the poor, which is admirable in its way. But Jake could have had his pick of accomplished women. Instead, he chose someone who'll never be able to contribute financially or help advance his career. "I just worry she's holding him back already." Ashley's voice joined the conversation. "It's hard to watch. Jake's brilliant, and he deserves a partner who can match his ambition. Instead, he's supporting someone who seems content to stay exactly where she is. I keep hoping she'll surprise us, maybe go back to school or find a more prestigious position, but she seems perfectly happy with her little job." "Some women are very strategic," another voice added knowingly. "They find good men and lock them down before they realize they could do better. Jake married her so young, before he'd really established himself professionally. Now he feels obligated to make it work." Linda sighed dramatically. "Exactly. And Emma's sweet enough that Jake feels guilty for wanting more. She's trapped him with kindness and martyrdom. Who can argue with someone who claims to be serving the community? But meanwhile, his career suffers because he doesn't have a wife who can help him network or represent the family appropriately." I stood frozen by those windows, watching my reflection in the glass as Linda dissected my marriage and motivations for her friends' entertainment. Every fear Jake and I had navigated together was being validated and amplified by the woman who was supposed to love him enough to want him happy. Every choice I'd made to live authentically was being reinterpreted as manipulation and strategic poverty. The drive home was silent. Jake seemed tired, and I couldn't find words for what I'd overheard. How do you tell your husband that his mother thinks you're a gold digger when the truth is so absurdly opposite? How do you explain that his family's concern about your inability to contribute financially is ironic beyond their comprehension? That night, lying in bed beside Jake, I made a decision that would change everything. I was tired of defending myself against accusations that revealed more about my accusers than about me. I was tired of watching Jake suffer because his family couldn't see past their own prejudices. Most of all, I was tired of letting people who claimed to love him treat his wife like a charity case who'd somehow tricked him into marriage. Linda Richardson wanted to know what kind of woman her son had married. She was about to find out, though not in any way she could have anticipated. Sometimes the truth was the kindest gift you could give someone, even when they'd spent years proving they didn't deserve it. My mother used to say that the right moment reveals everything, and you'll know it when it arrives. As I drifted off to sleep that Tuesday night, I had no idea that by the end of the week, Linda would be standing in a hospital corridor, staring up at my mother's name carved in marble, finally understanding exactly who she'd been calling a gold digger for the past 2 years. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Charlotte feel like a postcard. I walked through Freedom Park before my shift, breathing in the scent of changing leaves and watching early joggers trace familiar paths around the lake. This was my ritual on difficult days, a moment of peace before diving into the controlled chaos of the clinic. The park reminded me of morning walks with my mother when I was young, before hospital boards and foundation meetings consumed her time. Back when she was just mom, teaching me to identify different birds and telling me stories about the families who visited her pediatric wing. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Coffee tonight? Want to hear about your day?" Such a simple message, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid between us lately. He'd been more attentive since the country club incident, more protective, though I hadn't told him what I'd overheard. Jake had an intuitive sense about tension, probably developed from years of navigating his mother's moods and his sister's drama. He knew something had shifted that night, even if he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The clinic was already bustling when I arrived. Dr. Sarah Chen, my supervisor and closest friend at work, was reviewing charts with the determined expression she wore on busy days. Sarah had been my anchor during the difficult months with Jake's family, though she didn't know the full extent of the situation. She knew I was struggling with in-law relationships, but I'd kept the financial accusations private. Sarah understood family complexity from her own experience immigrating with parents who'd sacrificed everything for her medical education, only to watch her choose community health over lucrative private practice. "Morning, Emma," Sarah called without looking up from her charts. "We've got a full schedule, plus 3 walk-ins already waiting. Mrs. Rodriguez is here with Sophia again, and Marcus Thompson needs his diabetes follow-up. Oh, and there's a new family, the Garcias. Mom speaks limited English, but their daughter Isabella is translating. 7-year-old with persistent cough, no insurance." I nodded, already mentally shifting into work mode. This was where I felt most myself, most useful, most aligned with the values my mother had instilled in me. Every patient represented someone who needed an advocate, someone who deserved quality care regardless of their ability to pay. My mother used to say that medicine was a calling disguised as a profession, and that the real rewards came from the lives you touched, rather than the bank accounts you filled. Sophia Rodriguez bounced into my exam room with the energy of a 6-year-old whose asthma was well controlled. Her mother, Maria, followed with the grateful smile she always wore when Sophia was breathing easily. Maria worked double shifts at a textile factory to afford Sophia's medications, and she treated every good checkup like a celebration. Through our broken Spanish-English conversations, I'd learned that Maria's dream was to save enough money to bring her mother from Guatemala to meet her granddaughter. "Sophia's numbers look excellent," I told Maria as Sophia colored a picture of the lungs we'd drawn together. "The new inhaler technique is working perfectly. You're doing an amazing job managing her care." Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Gracias, Nurse Emma. You saved my baby many times. I know can pay much, but you always help." This was why I did this work. Not for the salary, which was modest, or the hours, which were long, but for moments like these when healthcare became about human connection rather than profit margins. I thought about Linda's comments regarding my lack of financial contribution to my marriage, and I wondered how she would quantify the value of keeping Sophia healthy, or helping Marcus maintain his independence despite diabetes complications. The Garcia family appointment proved more challenging. 7-year-old Isabella was indeed translating for her mother Carmen, who looked exhausted and worried. Isabella's cough had persisted for 3 weeks, and Carmen was terrified it might be something serious. Through Isabella's careful translation, I learned that Carmen cleaned offices at night and couldn't afford to miss work for doctor visits, which explained why they'd waited so long to seek treatment. After examining Isabella and determining she likely had a persistent cold complicated by environmental allergies, I spent extra time explaining treatment options and connecting Carmen with resources for ongoing care. I gave them samples of children's allergy medication and wrote detailed instructions in Spanish, thanks to the translation app I'd learned to use effectively. When Carmen tried to pay the small fee we charged uninsured patients, I quietly waved it and told Isabella to translate that her mother's love and attention were the best medicine Isabella could receive. These interactions filled my soul in ways that country club conversations never could. Each patient reminded me why I'd chosen this path, why I'd turned down offers from prestigious hospitals that would have impressed Jake's family but taken me away from the people who truly needed my skills. My mother had taught me that privilege was responsibility in disguise, and this clinic was where I honored that responsibility. Lunch break brought an unexpected visitor. Jake appeared in the clinic's small break room, carrying sandwiches from our favorite deli and wearing the slightly apologetic expression that meant he'd been thinking about his family again. He'd started doing this occasionally, showing up during my lunch break when he sensed I needed extra support. His timing was usually perfect, appearing on days when I dealt with particularly difficult cases or felt especially drained by family dynamics. "Thought you might need some real food," he said, settling into the plastic chair across from me. "You looked tired this morning, and I know you probably forgot to pack lunch again." He was right, of course. I'd been too distracted by thoughts of Linda's conversation to remember basic self-care. Jake had learned my patterns during our 2 years together, including my tendency to skip meals when I was processing emotional situations. It was one of the many ways he took care of me without making it feel like management or control. "How's your day?" I asked, unwrapping the turkey sandwich he'd brought. Jake worked for a growing tech company that specialized in healthcare software, and he genuinely enjoyed the challenge of making medical records more efficient and user-friendly. His work had purpose similar to mine, though his family seemed to value it more because it came with better earning potential and more prestigious networking opportunities. Good, actually. We're launching a new patient portal system that should make it easier for people to access their medical information. I keep thinking about your patients when we design these systems, wondering how to make them work for families like the ones you see every day. This was part of why I loved him. Jake didn't just tolerate my work. He found ways to connect his own professional skills to the mission I cared about. He'd never suggested I find a different job or pursue more lucrative opportunities. Instead, he looked for ways to support what I was already doing, to make my work more effective and impactful. "Speaking of family," Jake continued carefully, "Mom called this morning. She wants to have dinner Friday night to celebrate Ashley's promotion at the law firm. I told her we'd probably be there, but I wanted to check with you first." The sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Another family dinner meant another evening of subtle criticisms and careful conversations. It meant watching Jake navigate between defending me and maintaining peace with his family. It meant smiling politely while Linda found new ways to highlight my inadequacies, and Ashley shared stories about her increasingly expensive lifestyle. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What kind of promotion did Ashley get?" "Senior associate, I think." "Something that comes with a significant raise and partnership track." "Mom's very proud." I could imagine Linda's pride. Ashley's success validated everything Linda believed about appropriate choices for accomplished women. Ashley had married a wealthy lawyer, lived in an expensive house, and was climbing the career ladder in a profession that impressed other people. She represented everything Linda wished I had been for Jake. "That's wonderful for her," I said, and I meant it. Ashley might be judgmental about my choices, but she worked hard and deserved recognition for her achievements. My frustration wasn't with her success. It was with the way her success was used as a measuring stick for my worth. Jake studied my face with the careful attention he developed over months of watching me navigate his family's disapproval. "We don't have to go if you don't want to. I can tell Mom we have other plans." "No, it's fine. Ashley deserves to celebrate, and it's important to you to be there for family milestones. It's important to me that you're comfortable too. My family's opinion doesn't define our marriage, Emma. You know that, right?" I nodded, because I did know that intellectually. Jake had proven repeatedly that his loyalty belonged to our marriage, rather than to his family's expectations. But emotional knowledge was different from intellectual understanding, and Linda's constant criticism was wearing down my confidence in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. The afternoon brought a steady stream of patients, each requiring the full attention that made my work rewarding and exhausting. An elderly man with uncontrolled diabetes needed education about dietary changes he could afford to implement. A teenage mother brought her fussy baby for a wellness check, and I spent extra time teaching her about infant development and connecting her with parenting resources. A middle-aged woman came in for a blood pressure check and ended up crying about her fear of losing her job due to medical absences. Each interaction reminded me that healthcare was ultimately about trust and connection. These patients chose our clinic not because we had the fanciest equipment or most prestigious reputation, but because they felt heard and respected here. They knew we wouldn't judge them for their insurance status or lecture them about lifestyle choices they couldn't afford to change. They trusted us to provide excellent care within the constraints of their real lives. Dr. Chen found me updating charts at the end of the day, and she settled into the chair beside my desk with the purposeful air that meant she wanted to talk about something important. Sarah had been watching me more carefully lately, and I suspected she'd noticed the subtle changes in my mood and energy level. "You seem distracted lately," she said without preamble. "Everything okay at home?" Sarah and I had developed the kind of friendship that allowed for direct questions and honest answers. She'd been my supervisor when I started at the clinic 2 years ago, but our professional relationship had evolved into genuine friendship based on shared values and mutual respect. She was one of the few people who knew me well enough to notice when something was bothering me. "Just some family dynamics," I replied, which was true if incomplete. "Jake's family has strong opinions about his choice in wives." "Their loss," Sarah said firmly. "I've met Jake several times, and he clearly adores you. Anyone with eyes can see that you two are perfect for each other. His mother thinks he could have done better. Someone more accomplished, more financially secure, more helpful for his career advancement." Sarah snorted inelegantly. "You're a nurse practitioner who chose to work with underserved populations instead of chasing money at some boutique practice. That takes more character than most people have. If they can't see that, it says everything about them and nothing about you." This was exactly what I needed to hear, and exactly why Sarah had become such an important friend. She understood the value of service-oriented work, the satisfaction of making healthcare accessible to people who needed advocates. She'd made similar choices in her own career, turning down lucrative opportunities to build something meaningful in community health. "I know you're right," I said. "It's just exhausting sometimes, feeling like I have to constantly prove my worth to people who've already decided I'm not good enough." "Have you talked to Jake about how much this is affecting you? He knows his family disapproves of me, but I don't want to put him in an impossible position. He loves them and he loves me. I don't want to force him to choose sides." Sarah considered this thoughtfully. "Maybe the problem isn't that you need to prove your worth to them. Maybe the problem is that you're accepting their right to judge you in the first place. You don't owe anyone justification for your choices, Emma. You're living your life according to your values, contributing to your community, and making your husband happy. That's enough." Her words stayed with me during the drive home through Charlotte's evening traffic. Sarah was right that I'd been operating from a defensive position, trying to earn approval from people who'd already decided I wasn't worthy of it. But changing that dynamic felt more complicated than simply deciding to stop caring about their opinions. Jake's relationship with his family affected our marriage whether I wanted it to or not, and their treatment of me created tension that impacted him as much as me. Friday evening arrived too quickly. I'd spent the day hoping for some kind of emergency that would provide a legitimate excuse to skip Ashley's celebration dinner. But the clinic had been unusually quiet and efficient. Jake picked me up after work, and we drove to his parents' house in Myers Park, with the resigned energy of people fulfilling an obligation rather than anticipating a pleasant evening. The Richardson house always intimidated me slightly, not because it was the largest or most expensive in the neighborhood, but because it represented everything Linda valued about social positioning and material success. The perfectly manicured lawn, the expensive cars in the circular driveway, the subtle status symbols that communicated prosperity to anyone who knew how to read them. It was the kind of house that demanded certain behavior and conversation topics, where my usual stories about clinic patients felt out of place and inappropriate. Linda greeted us at the door, wearing a dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Her smile bright and welcoming in the way that felt performative rather than genuine. She hugged Jake with maternal warmth, then turned to me with the cooler embrace she reserved for obligations she handled gracefully, but didn't particularly enjoy. "Emma, darling, "You look lovely," she said, examining my navy dress with the quick assessment that had become familiar. "I love how you make simple pieces work so well for you." The compliment felt like criticism wrapped in silk, the kind of comment that sounded supportive but left you feeling somehow diminished. Linda had perfected this art over years of social navigation, delivering observations that highlighted inadequacies while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. Ashley arrived shortly after us, glowing with the satisfaction of professional achievement and wearing a designer suit that screamed success and sophistication. Her husband David followed, checking his phone with the distracted air of someone whose time was extremely valuable and whose presence at family dinners represented significant sacrifice. "Emma," Ashley exclaimed, embracing me with genuine warmth that made me feel guilty for my negative thoughts. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know how busy you are at the clinic." Ashley wasn't intentionally cruel. She was simply someone who measured success in terms that didn't include my work or values. Her enthusiasm about her promotion was infectious, and I found myself genuinely happy for her achievements, even as I dreaded the inevitable comparisons that would emerge throughout the evening. Dinner conversation centered around Ashley's new position and the opportunities it would create for her career advancement. David discussed the cases he was handling at his firm, dropping names of prominent clients and significant settlements with casual confidence. Bob asked intelligent questions about both their professional challenges, clearly proud of his daughter's accomplishments, and pleased to have a son-in-law whose success reflected well on the family. I contributed where appropriate, asking questions about Ashley's responsibilities and expressing genuine interest in David's legal work. But I felt like an observer rather than a participant, watching a conversation that had no natural entry points for stories about community health or uninsured patients. When Jake tried to steer discussion toward my work, Linda would listen politely before redirecting attention back to Ashley's achievements or David's cases. The turning point came during dessert, when Linda began sharing updates about mutual friends and their children's accomplishments. Each story seemed carefully chosen to highlight themes of career advancement, financial success, and social status. The Pattersons' daughter had just made partner at a prestigious accounting firm. The Morrisons' son had married a doctor and bought a house in the most exclusive neighborhood in South Charlotte. The Williams family's youngest had started law school at Duke. "It's so wonderful to see young people making smart choices about their futures," Linda mused, glancing meaningfully at Jake. "Building careers that provide security and open doors for their families." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "David and I were just talking about how important it is to think strategically about career paths. My promotion means we can finally start looking at houses in Ballantyne. Maybe think about starting a family in a few years." "That's exactly the kind of planning that leads to success," Linda agreed. "Young couples need to think about their earning potential, their networking opportunities, their ability to provide the lifestyle they want for their children." The conversation continued in this vein, with subtle but unmistakable implications about the importance of financial security and career advancement. I felt Jake's tension increasing beside me, his jaw tightening as his family painted pictures of successful marriages that looked nothing like ours. When Linda began discussing the benefits of wives who could contribute significantly to household income, Jake finally intervened. "Emma contributes plenty to our marriage," he said firmly. "Her work makes a real difference in people's lives, and I'm proud of what she accomplishes every day." "Of course, darling," Linda replied smoothly. "We all admire Emma's dedication to helping people. It's just that there are different ways to make a difference, and some provide more security for the future." "Security isn't just about money, Mom. Emma's work gives our life meaning and purpose. That's worth more than a bigger paycheck." Ashley jumped in with apparent helpfulness. "But Jake, you have to think practically too. What happens when you want to buy a house, or start a family, or take vacations? Love is wonderful, but it doesn't pay bills." "We pay our bills just fine," Jake replied, his voice gaining an edge that warned of deeper anger. "Emma and I are building the life we want together, based on our values and priorities." "But what about building for the future?" Linda pressed. "What about creating opportunities for advancement and growth?" "Emma's work is admirable, but it doesn't offer much potential for career development or increased earning capacity." I watched this conversation unfold with growing awareness that I was the subject rather than a participant. They were discussing my inadequacies as if I weren't sitting at the table, analyzing my professional choices and financial limitations with clinical detachment. Jake was defending me passionately, but the fact that defense was necessary highlighted everything wrong with the situation. My work offers exactly the kind of development I want, I said quietly, speaking for the first time in several minutes. I'm helping families access health care they couldn't otherwise afford. I'm making a difference in my community. That's the kind of success that matters to me. Linda's smile became more strained. Of course, dear, but surely you want to contribute more substantially to your marriage? Jake has so much potential, and the right partner could help him achieve so much more. I support Jake's goals completely. We're partners in everything we do. But partnerships require equal contribution, Ashley added. David and I both bring financial resources and professional connections to our marriage. It makes us stronger as a team. Emma makes me stronger every day, Jake said firmly. She challenges me to think about what really matters, to use my skills for purposes beyond just making money. Our marriage isn't a business partnership. It's a life partnership. Bob had remained quiet throughout this exchange, but I noticed him watching the dynamics with thoughtful attention. He was a man who'd built his construction business through hard work and practical decisions, and I suspected he understood the value of dedication and service, even if he didn't often voice opinions that contradicted his wife's views. Jake, Linda said with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a stubborn child, I'm not questioning Emma's character or dedication. I'm simply pointing out that marriage requires practical considerations alongside emotional ones. Emma's choices limit your options as a couple, and that affects your future together. The words hung in the air like an accusation, impossible to ignore or deflect. Linda had finally said explicitly what she'd been implying for months. I was holding Jake back, limiting his potential, preventing him from achieving the success he deserved. According to her logic, my commitment to community health was selfish rather than selfless, a barrier to Jake's advancement rather than a shared value we both cherished. Jake's face flushed with anger. Mom, you need to stop. Emma's work is valuable and important, and I'm tired of listening to you diminish it. We're happy with our choices, and your disapproval isn't going to change anything. I'm not disapproving, Linda protested. I'm concerned about your future. You're my son, and I want you to have every opportunity for success and happiness. I am successful and happy. Emma makes me both of those things. If you can't see that, it's your problem, not ours. The dinner ended awkwardly, with forced conversations about other topics and careful avoidance of any further discussion about career choices or marriage dynamics. Ashley tried to lighten the mood by sharing funny stories about her law firm colleagues, and Bob asked Jake about his latest project at work. But the underlying tension remained, a current of disapproval and disappointment that colored every interaction. During the drive home, Jake apologized repeatedly for his family's behavior. He was angry and embarrassed, frustrated by their inability to see what he valued about me and our marriage. I reassured him that I understood their concerns even if I disagreed with them, but privately I was reaching the limits of my patience with the constant criticism and judgment. That night, lying in bed beside Jake, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity and determination. I was tired of defending myself against accusations that revealed more about my accusers than about me. I was tired of watching Jake suffer because his family couldn't accept his choices. Most importantly, I was tired of allowing people who claimed to love him to treat his wife with such obvious disrespect. Linda Richardson wanted to know what kind of woman her son had married. She was about to find out. Saturday morning brought unexpected clarity, along with my usual coffee and quiet reflection time. I'd spent the night processing Linda's dinner conversation, replaying her comments about my limiting Jake's options, and her obvious belief that I was somehow deceiving him about my worth as a partner. The accusation stung not because it contained truth, but because it revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had poisoned our relationship from the beginning. Jake slept late, exhausted by the emotional toll of defending our marriage against his family's criticism. I watched him sleep and felt a surge of protective love that strengthened my resolve about what needed to happen next. He deserved better than this constant tension between his family and his wife. He deserved the chance to be proud of both without having to choose between them. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley, sent early enough to suggest she'd been thinking about the previous evening's conversation. "Hey Emma, hope you didn't take anything personally last night. We all just want the best for Jake. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime and talk about ways to help him advance his career." The message was perfectly crafted to sound supportive while reinforcing every criticism from dinner. Ashley was offering to help me become a better wife for her brother, to guide me toward choices that would make me more suitable for the Richardson family's expectations. The condescension was breathtaking in its complete lack of self-awareness. I stared at the message for several minutes, considering various responses. The old Emma would have agreed to coffee, would have listened politely to Ashley's suggestions, would have tried to find common ground and prove her worth through accommodation. But something had shifted during last night's dinner, some final thread of patience that had snapped when Linda suggested I was preventing Jake from achieving his potential. Instead of responding to Ashley's text, I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd been curious about for months. Linda and Bob Richardson presented themselves as solidly upper-middle class, comfortable enough to afford their Myers Park House and Country Club membership, successful enough to maintain the lifestyle they valued. But I'd never actually investigated the reality behind their carefully constructed image. What I discovered was illuminating. Bob's construction company was struggling more than anyone knew, having lost several major contracts to competitors with lower bids and more efficient operations. Their house carried a mortgage that consumed a significant portion of his income, and Linda's spending patterns suggested someone living beyond sustainable means. Ashley and David were supporting some of Linda's more expensive habits, including her country club membership and the frequent shopping trips she took with her friends. The Richardson family's financial security was largely an illusion, maintained through careful budgeting, strategic debt, and assistance from Ashley's more prosperous marriage. They weren't poor, but they weren't nearly as comfortable as they appeared. Linda's obsession with my financial limitations was particularly ironic, given her own family's precarious economic position. More interesting was the information I found about the charity work Linda claimed as her primary occupation. She served on several boards, but always in auxiliary or honorary positions that required more social connections than actual contribution. Her volunteer work consisted mainly of organizing fundraising events where other people donated money, and she received recognition for her coordination efforts. She was skilled at leveraging other people's wealth and generosity into social capital for herself. This research wasn't motivated by spite or a desire to expose the Richardson family's vulnerabilities. Instead, it helped me understand the source of Linda's anxiety about my marriage to Jake. She was projecting her own financial insecurities onto our relationship, interpreting my modest lifestyle as evidence of gold-digging behavior because money and status were constant concerns in her own life. Jake woke up around 10, stretching and yawning before pulling me close for a lazy Saturday morning conversation. We'd developed a tradition of spending Saturday mornings in bed, talking about the week's events and making plans for the weekend. It was our time to reconnect after busy schedules and family obligations, to remember why we'd chosen each other despite external pressures. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Mom was completely out of line with those comments about your career limiting my options. She's worried about your future. I understand that, even if I disagree with her conclusions. But you shouldn't have to sit there and listen to criticism about choices that make us both happy. Our marriage works because we share the same values, not because we're trying to impress anyone else." I traced patterns on his chest, thinking about how to address what I'd been considering all morning. "Jake, what would you say if I told you my family has money?" "Significant money?" He laughed, assuming I was making a joke. "I'd say your family has great taste in daughters, regardless of their bank account." "I'm serious. What if I came from wealth but chose not to live that way? What if I deliberately keep my background private because I want to be valued for who I am, rather than what I represent?" Jake propped himself up on his elbow, studying my face with growing curiosity. "Are you telling me you're secretly rich?" "I'm telling you that your mother's assumptions about my financial limitations might be more wrong than she realizes." "Emma, what are you saying exactly?" I sat up, pulling my knees to my chest as I considered how much to reveal. My mother was Catherine Williams. She died when I was 16, But before that, she was one of the major philanthropists in Charlotte. My family has significant wealth, and I have access to it if I choose to use it. Jake stared at me with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't fit his existing understanding of reality. Catherine Williams, as in the Catherine Williams Memorial Wing at the hospital? That's my mother. The Pediatric Oncology Wing was funded by her foundation after she died. I've been living modestly because I wanted to build a life based on my own choices and values, not because I had to. So when Mom worries about you being a gold digger, she's worried that I married you for access to wealth that I already have more of than your entire family combined. Jake was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of this revelation. I watched his face cycle through surprise, confusion, and finally a kind of rueful appreciation for the irony of the situation. Why didn't you tell me before now? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what my family has. And because I wasn't sure how you'd react to discovering that I'd been keeping something so significant from you. I do love you for who you are. That wouldn't change regardless of your bank account. But Emma, this changes everything about how my family has been treating you. Does it? Should it? If their respect for me depends on my net worth, what does that say about their character? Jake considered this carefully. You're right that it shouldn't matter, but it might help them understand that their assumptions about you have been completely wrong. Or it might make them feel foolish and defensive, which could make things worse rather than better. We spent the morning discussing the implications of this revelation and what it might mean for our relationship with his family. Jake was fascinated by the details I shared about growing up with wealth, my mother's philanthropic work, and my decision to live independently of family money. He understood better now why I'd been so patient with his family's criticism, and why their assumptions about my motivations were particularly frustrating. So you could have paid for our entire wedding without touching Jake's savings? He asked. I could have paid for a wedding 10 times more expensive without making a dent in my trust fund. And you chose to let us struggle with the budget because I wanted our wedding to represent our values and choices, not my family's wealth. I wanted it to be ours. Jake shook his head in amazement. My mother has been worrying about you taking advantage of me financially, when you've been supporting our life together more than I realized. I've been supporting our life together because I chose to build it with you, not because I'm obligated to spend my family's money. The conversation continued throughout the morning, with Jake asking questions about my childhood, my mother's work, and my decision to pursue nursing despite having other options. I shared stories I'd never told anyone, memories of growing up in a house where money was a tool for helping others, rather than a measure of personal worth. I explained my mother's philosophy about privilege and responsibility, and how her death had reinforced my determination to use my advantages meaningfully. By afternoon, we'd reached an understanding about how to handle this information going forward. Jake supported my preference for continuing to live modestly, and he agreed that revealing my background to his family should be my decision rather than his. But he was also clear that he wouldn't tolerate any further criticism of my career choices or financial contributions to our marriage. The next time Mom makes a comment about you limiting my potential, I'm going to tell her exactly how wrong she is about everything. You don't have to defend me by exposing my background. You can defend me by standing up for the choices we've made together. I've been doing that, but it hasn't stopped the criticism. Then maybe it's time to be more direct about setting boundaries with your family. We spent Sunday quietly, enjoying the kind of lazy day that had become precious since family tensions escalated. We cooked breakfast together, read the newspaper, took a walk through our neighborhood. Jake seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks, as if understanding the full picture of our situation had relieved some invisible pressure he'd been carrying. But I could see him thinking, processing the implications of everything I'd shared. He was beginning to understand that his family's treatment of me wasn't just misguided, it was based on fundamental misconceptions about who I was and what I brought to our marriage. The gold digger accusations were particularly ironic, given that I was probably the wealthiest person any of them had ever known personally. Monday morning brought a return to routine, but with an undercurrent of anticipation that something was about to change. I went to work, energized by the clarity that had emerged from weekend conversations. and Jake went to his office with a new determination to address his family's behavior more directly. The shift in our dynamic was subtle but significant. Jake had always supported my choices, but now he understood the full context of those choices. He knew that my commitment to community health represented a deliberate decision to use my advantages for service rather than personal gain. He understood that my modest lifestyle wasn't evidence of limitation but of intentional values-based living. That understanding would prove crucial in the days ahead, when Linda's assumptions about my background would be tested in ways none of us could have anticipated. The call came Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing treatment plans with Dr. Chen. Jake's name appeared on my phone screen, but when I answered, his voice carried an urgency that immediately captured my attention. "Emma, I need you to meet me at Presbyterian Hospital as soon as you can get there." Mom collapsed at the country club during lunch with her friends. They're running tests, but they think it might be her heart. The drive to the hospital felt surreal, my mind cycling between concern for Linda's health and awareness that this crisis would inevitably shift family dynamics in unpredictable ways. Despite our complicated relationship, I didn't want Linda to be seriously ill. She was Jake's mother, and her well-being mattered to him, regardless of how she'd treated me. Presbyterian Hospital held particular significance for my family, though I'd never mentioned this to Jake or his relatives. My mother had served on their board of directors for years before her death, and the Williams Foundation continued to support several of their programs. I knew the hospital's layout, their staff, their protocols better than most visitors because I'd spent countless hours there during my mother's final illness and in the years afterward when foundation business required my presence. I found Jake in the cardiac unit waiting room, looking scared and exhausted. Bob sat beside him, staring at his hands with the helpless expression of someone whose usual competence meant nothing in medical situations. Ashley paced near the windows, her phone pressed to her ear as she managed crisis communications with typical efficiency. "How is she?" I asked, settling into the chair beside Jake and taking his hand. "They're still running tests. The doctor thinks it was a mild heart attack, but they want to do more imaging to determine the extent of the damage. She was conscious when the ambulance arrived, but she's been asking for pain medication." I squeezed his hand, offering the comfort of presence rather than empty reassurances. Heart attacks could be unpredictable, and until the test results provided more information, speculation would only increase everyone's anxiety. Ashley finished her phone call and approached our small group. "I've rearranged my court schedule for the rest of the week, and David is handling the kids' pickup from school. Dad, do you need me to contact any of your clients about potential delays?" Bob nodded gratefully. "The Morrison project deadline might be an issue, but family comes first right now. I can help coordinate anything you need," I offered. "My schedule is flexible, and I know how to navigate hospital systems if you need advocacy or information." Ashley looked surprised by my offer, as if she'd forgotten I might have useful skills in medical situations. "That's actually helpful. Do you know anyone on staff here who could give us better information about Mom's condition?" I hesitated, knowing that answering honestly would reveal more about my hospital connections than I'd intended. But Linda's health took precedence over my privacy concerns, and if I could help her family get better information or faster treatment, that mattered more than maintaining my carefully constructed anonymity. "I know several people here, including some cardiac specialists. Let me see what I can find out." I excused myself and walked toward the nurses' station, where I recognized Jennifer Martinez from my mother's foundation work. Jennifer had been one of the nurse supervisors when my mother was a patient, and she'd maintained contact with our family through foundation events and memorial services. "Emma Williams," Jennifer Martinez said with genuine warmth when she saw me approaching the nurses' station. "I haven't seen you since the foundation meeting last spring. How are you doing?" The recognition in her voice carried across the quiet corridor, and I noticed Jake's head turn toward us from the waiting area. Jennifer had been one of the senior nurses during my mother's final weeks at this hospital, and she'd stayed in touch with our family through foundation work and memorial events. Her greeting made it clear that I wasn't just another visitor seeking information about a patient. "I'm well, thank you. I'm here because my mother-in-law was brought in with chest pain earlier today." Linda Richardson. I was hoping you might be able to give us some insight into her condition, or connect us with her care team. Jennifer's expression shifted to professional concern. Mrs. Richardson is in excellent hands with Dr. Patterson's cardiac team. Let me see what I can share with you. She consulted her computer screen briefly. Are you listed as family contact? I'm her daughter-in-law. Her son Jake is in the waiting room with the rest of the family. Dr. Patterson should be out to speak with the family shortly. He's one of our best cardiologists, and if anyone can help Mrs. Richardson, it's him. I'll let him know you're here. I thanked Jennifer and returned to the waiting area, where Jake was watching me with curious attention. Ashley and Bob had also noticed my conversation with the nurse, and I could see questions forming in their expressions. The nurse says Dr. Patterson will be out soon to update us, I reported. He's apparently one of their top cardiac specialists. How do you know the nursing staff here? Ashley asked directly. I've spent time here before. Charlotte's healthcare community is smaller than people realize. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. I'd spent considerable time at Presbyterian Hospital during my mother's illness, and afterward through foundation business, but my connections ran much deeper than casual familiarity with the healthcare community. Several wings of this hospital bore my family's name, and the Catherine Williams Foundation provided ongoing funding for cardiac research and patient care programs. Dr. Patterson emerged from the cardiac unit 20 minutes later, carrying the confident demeanor of someone comfortable delivering medical information to anxious families. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of reassuring presence that came from years of guiding people through health crises. Richardson family? He asked, and we all stood to meet him. I'm Jake Richardson, Linda's son. This is my father, Bob, my sister, Ashley, and my wife, Emma. Dr. Patterson shook hands with each of us before settling into explanation mode. Mrs. Richardson did experience a cardiac event, but the good news is that it appears to be what we call a minor myocardial infarction. Her heart muscle shows minimal damage, and her vital signs have stabilized nicely since her arrival. Bob exhaled audibly, relief evident in the way his shoulders relaxed for the first time since we'd arrived. Ashley immediately began asking practical questions about treatment plans and recovery timelines, her legal training evident in the systematic way she approached gathering information. We'll want to keep her for observation for at least 48 hours, Dr. Patterson continued. We're running additional tests to determine if there are any underlying issues that contributed to today's event, and we'll be starting her on medications to prevent future problems. Can we see her? Jake asked. She's resting comfortably, but yes, family visits are fine. I'd recommend keeping them brief for now, and she may be a bit groggy from the pain medication we've given her. Dr. Patterson provided additional details about Linda's treatment plan and answered the family's questions with patience and thoroughness. As the conversation wound down, he turned to me with an expression of recognition that made my stomach tighten. Emma, it's good to see you again. I believe we met during the foundation reception last year? The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jake, Ashley, and Bob all turned toward me with expressions of confusion and growing curiosity. Dr. Patterson was clearly referring to some kind of formal event, not the casual healthcare community connection I'd implied earlier. Yes, we did, I replied carefully, hoping to deflect further discussion. Thank you for taking such excellent care of Mrs. Richardson. But Ashley's legal instincts were too sharp to let this pass. What foundation reception? She asked directly. Dr. Patterson looked between me and the family, clearly sensing that he'd stumbled into some kind of sensitive territory. The Catherine Williams Foundation's annual donor recognition event. Emma was representing her family's ongoing support for our cardiac research programs. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Jake's face as he processed this information, connecting dots he hadn't previously considered. Ashley's expression shifted from confusion to sharp attention, and Bob looked completely bewildered by this unexpected revelation about his daughter-in-law's background. I should let you all get back to visiting Mrs. Richardson. Drive. Patterson said diplomatically, clearly recognizing that he'd revealed information the family hadn't previously known. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about her care. After he left, the four of us stood in awkward silence for several moments. I could see Jake struggling with how to address what had just happened, while Ashley was obviously calculating the implications of learning that her brother's wife had some kind of connection to one of Charlotte's major philanthropic foundations. "Emma," Ashley said carefully, "what did Dr. Patterson mean about representing your family's support for cardiac research?" There was no way to deflect or minimize this revelation without outright lying, and the hospital corridor wasn't the place for the conversation that needed to happen. But Ashley's question demanded some kind of response, and Jake was looking at me with an expression that said he was ready to support whatever I chose to share. "My family has a history of supporting healthcare initiatives in Charlotte," I said simply. "It's not something I talk about much because I prefer to keep my personal and professional lives separate." "But the Catherine Williams Foundation," Bob said slowly, clearly trying to remember where he'd heard that name. "Isn't that one of the biggest charitable organizations in the city?" "My mother established the foundation before she died. It continues to support various healthcare and education programs." Ashley's eyes widened as the implications became clear. "Your mother was Catherine Williams? As in the Catherine Williams Memorial Wing?" "Yes." The single-word confirmation seemed to echo in the hospital corridor. Ashley and Bob stared at me with the expression of people whose understanding of reality had just shifted dramatically. Jake reached for my hand, offering support even as he processed this new information about his wife's background. "Emma," Ashley said slowly, "do you realize what this means? Your family is one of the wealthiest and most influential in Charlotte. Why didn't you ever mention this?" "Because it's not who I am. It's my family's legacy, not my identity. But the foundation, the hospital connections, the resources you have access to, this changes everything about how we've understood your situation." I could see Ashley's mind working, recalculating every assumption she'd made about my financial limitations and career choices. The revelation that I came from significant wealth reframed every conversation we'd ever had about money, success, and my marriage to Jake. "It doesn't change anything about who I am or the choices I've made," I said firmly. "I work at the clinic because that's where I want to work. I live modestly because that's how I choose to live. My family's wealth doesn't define my worth any more than your assumptions about my poverty did." Bob was shaking his head in amazement. "Linda is going to feel terrible when she realizes how wrong she's been about your background." "Is she? Will she feel terrible about being wrong, or will she feel angry about being deceived?" The question silenced all of them, because it highlighted the central issue that my revelation created. Linda's criticism of me hadn't been based on accurate information about my financial situation, but her reaction to learning the truth would reveal more about her character than about mine. Would she be embarrassed by her mistakes, or would she be furious that I'd allowed her to make them? "We should go see Mom," Jake said finally. "We can talk about this more later, after we know she's going to be okay." We made our way to Linda's room in the cardiac unit, where she was resting in the elevated hospital bed, with the pale, exhausted appearance of someone whose body had just experienced significant stress. Her eyes opened when she heard us enter, and she managed a weak smile for her family. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Jake asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Like I've been run over by a truck," Linda replied, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd used during her initial treatment. "But the doctor says I'm going to be fine." Ashley and Bob took turns reassuring Linda and asking about her comfort level, while I remained near the doorway, uncertain about my role in this family medical crisis. Linda's relationship with me had been strained enough under normal circumstances, and I wasn't sure how my presence would affect her stress level during recovery. "Emma?" Linda said suddenly, noticing me for the first time. "Thank you for coming. I know this interrupts your work schedule." Her tone was softer than usual, perhaps influenced by medication or the vulnerability that came with being hospitalized. For the first time since I'd known her, Linda was speaking to me without the underlying tension that usually characterized our interactions. "I'm glad you're feeling better," I replied sincerely. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can help coordinate with the hospital staff?" "Actually, there is something. The nurses mentioned that my insurance might not cover a private room for the entire stay. but I really can't handle having a roommate right now. Is there any way to work around that? Ashley immediately began calculating solutions. Dad and I can probably cover the difference for a private room. It's worth the extra cost if it helps Mom recover more comfortably. Or I could speak with the patient advocate about other options, I offered. Sometimes insurance companies will approve extended private room stays for cardiac patients if the medical team recommends it for recovery purposes. Linda looked surprised by my suggestion. You know about insurance advocacy? I deal with insurance issues every day at the clinic. Medical billing and patient advocacy are part of my job. I didn't realize nurses handled those kinds of administrative responsibilities. Ashley and Bob exchanged glances, clearly wondering if they should mention what they'd just learned about my hospital connections and family foundation. Jake caught their expressions and shook his head slightly, indicating that this wasn't the right time or place for revelations about my background. Emma has a lot of skills beyond direct patient care, Jake said diplomatically. She's excellent at navigating healthcare systems and advocating for patients who need extra support. Linda nodded thoughtfully. That would be very helpful, Emma. I hate feeling like I don't understand what's happening or what my options are. I spent the next 30 minutes speaking with the patient advocate, the insurance coordinator, and Linda's nursing team about options for extended private room coverage. The process was straightforward once I explained Linda's medical needs and anxiety about sharing space during cardiac recovery. Her insurance agreed to cover the private room for the full stay, saving the family several $100s in out-of-pocket expenses. When I returned to Linda's room with the good news, her reaction surprised me. Instead of simple gratitude, she looked at me with something approaching respect, as if she'd just realized I possessed competencies she hadn't previously recognized. "How did you manage that so quickly?" she asked. "I know the right people to contact and the right language to use when advocating for patients. Insurance companies respond better to medical justifications than financial requests. I'm impressed. I had no idea you were so skilled at healthcare administration." Ashley was watching this interaction with obvious interest, clearly seeing her mother's opinion of me shifting in real time. The revelation about my family background was still hanging between us, unaddressed but influencing everything, and I could see Ashley calculating whether this was the right moment to share what she'd learned. "Mom," Ashley said carefully, "there's something about Emma that we just found out today. Something that might change how you understand her situation." Jake tensed beside me, and I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't how I'd wanted Linda to learn about my background, in a hospital room while she was recovering from a heart attack. But Ashley seemed determined to address the elephant in the room, and stopping her would only make the situation more awkward. "What kind of something?" Linda asked, her attention sharpening despite her obvious fatigue. "Emma's family is the Catherine Williams Foundation. Her mother was Catherine Williams." Linda stared at me with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't fit their existing understanding of reality. I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally a kind of shocked comprehension as the implications became clear. "Catherine Williams, as in the hospital wing? The Pediatric Oncology Center?" "Yes." "But that means—" Linda trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with everything she'd believed about my financial situation and background. "It means Emma comes from one of the wealthiest families in Charlotte," Ashley said bluntly. "It means every assumption we've made about her financial limitations has been completely wrong." Linda continued staring at me, and I could see her replaying months of conversations in light of this new information. Every comment about my modest lifestyle, every concern about my ability to contribute financially to my marriage, every suggestion that I was somehow taking advantage of Jake's earning potential, all of it was being recontextualized by the understanding that I had access to more wealth than the entire Richardson family combined. "Why didn't you tell us?" Linda asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I wanted to be valued for who I am, not what my family has. Because I wanted to build relationships based on character rather than bank accounts." "But Emma, this changes everything. All the things I've said about your career choices, your financial contributions to the marriage. It doesn't change anything that matters. I chose to work at the clinic because that's where I want to be. I chose to live modestly because those are my values. My family's money doesn't change who I am or what I contribute to my marriage with Jake." Linda was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the information but its implications for how she'd treated me since Jake and I had gotten together. I could see her remembering specific conversations, specific criticisms, specific assumptions she'd made about my motivations and limitations. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "I've been completely wrong about your situation, and I've said things that must have been very hurtful. You've been concerned about Jake's future. I understand that motivation, even if I disagreed with your conclusions. But I've been so unfair to you. All those comments about gold digging and financial security, I must have sounded ridiculous." Ashley shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering her own contributions to the family's criticism of my background and choices. Bob remained quiet, but his expression suggested he was also reevaluating his understanding of his daughter-in-law. "The important thing now is focusing on your recovery," I said, redirecting attention away from apologies and recriminations. "Everything else can wait until you're feeling better." But Linda wasn't ready to let the subject drop. "Emma, I need you to know that I'm embarrassed by how I've treated you. If I'd known about your background, if you'd known about my background, would you have treated me better because I deserved it? Or because my family's money made me more acceptable to you?" The question hung in the air between us, highlighting the fundamental issue that my revelation had created. Linda's apology, while apparently sincere, was motivated by learning about my wealth rather than by recognizing that her treatment of me had been inappropriate regardless of my financial situation. "I'd like to think I would have treated you better because it was the right thing to do," Linda replied carefully. "Then you can start doing that now, based on who I am rather than what my family has." Jake squeezed my hand, offering support for the boundary I was setting. Ashley looked thoughtful, clearly processing the implications of our conversation for her own behavior toward me. Bob nodded approvingly, seemingly impressed by my directness in addressing the situation. The rest of our visit focused on Linda's medical care and recovery plans, but the dynamic in the room had shifted significantly. Linda spoke to me with a respect that hadn't been present before, asking my opinion about treatment options and expressing genuine appreciation for my help with insurance coordination. But I could see her struggling to reconcile her new understanding of my background with the assumptions that had shaped our relationship for 2 years. During the drive home, Jake and I talked about what had happened and what it might mean for our relationship with his family going forward. He was relieved that the truth was finally out, but concerned about how the revelation would affect family dynamics in the long term. "Mom seemed genuinely sorry about how she's treated you," he said. "She seemed sorry about being wrong about my financial situation. That's not the same thing as understanding why her treatment of me was inappropriate." "What do you mean?" "If Linda respects me now because she knows my family has money, what does that say about her values? Why should my worth as your wife depend on my bank account?" Jake considered this carefully. "You're right that her apology should be based on recognizing that she was wrong to judge you, not on discovering that her specific judgments were inaccurate." "Exactly. And if Ashley and your father start treating me differently now, it will be because they see me as valuable due to my wealth, not because they've recognized my actual worth as a person." The revelation of my background had created an opportunity for the Richardson family to reevaluate their treatment of me, but it had also created a test of their character. Would they learn from this experience and become more thoughtful about how they judged people? Or would they simply adjust their behavior toward me while maintaining the same superficial values that had caused problems in the first place? Only time would tell whether Linda's apology represented genuine growth or merely embarrassment at being caught in such spectacular misjudgment of my situation. But one thing was certain: the careful balance I'd maintained between my public and private identities had been permanently disrupted, and there would be no returning to the anonymity I'd worked so hard to preserve. The confrontation I'd been avoiding for months had finally happened. Not through my choice, but through the intersection of medical crisis and family revelation. Now I would have to navigate the aftermath of Linda's new understanding of my background, while maintaining the boundaries and values that had guided my choices all along. The question that remained was whether the Richardson family would prove capable of growth and genuine change, or whether this revelation would simply create new forms of complication in relationships that had already been strained by months of misunderstanding and misdirected criticism. The drive home from the hospital that evening felt like traveling through a landscape that had fundamentally changed while I wasn't looking. Jake's hand rested on mine across the center console, a steady anchor in the swirling uncertainty of what our family relationships would become, now that the carefully maintained boundaries around my identity had crumbled in a hospital corridor. Linda's reaction had surprised me with its immediate shift toward contrition, but I found myself questioning whether her apology represented genuine recognition of wrongdoing, or simply embarrassment at discovering she'd been so spectacularly wrong about my circumstances. The distinction mattered more than she probably realized, because it would determine whether this revelation created an opportunity for authentic relationship building or merely introduced new complications into an already strained dynamic. Jake seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd been carrying without fully acknowledging it had been lifted by the truth finally emerging. He'd spent months defending my choices and character against his family's subtle but persistent criticism, and now he had concrete evidence that their assumptions had been not just unfair, but absurdly misguided. "I keep thinking about all the times Mom worried about you taking advantage of me financially," he said as we pulled into our driveway. "The irony is almost too perfect." "The irony doesn't change anything important," I replied. "Your mother's concerns about gold digging were wrong factually, but they were also wrong morally. My worth as your partner shouldn't depend on my family's bank account any more than it should depend on my lack of one." Jake turned off the engine and shifted to face me fully. "You're right, but Emma, you have to admit this changes how we think about some things. When Mom suggested you weren't contributing enough financially to our marriage, she was criticizing someone who could probably buy their house outright without affecting her budget. And if I'd done that, would it have made me a better wife? Or just a wealthier one?" The question hung between us as we sat in the darkened car, processing not just the day's revelations, but their implications for how we understood ourselves as a couple. I'd spent 2 years building a marriage based on shared values and mutual respect, deliberately avoiding the complications that came with wealth and its expectations. Now those complications were rushing toward us whether I wanted them or not. Inside our townhouse, everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but the space felt different somehow. These modest rooms that I'd chosen, and furnished with careful attention to comfort rather than status, now existed in a new context, where my preferences would be interpreted differently by people who knew about my alternatives. Jake poured wine while I changed into comfortable clothes, and we settled on the couch with the kind of quiet intentionality that marked our most important conversations. The evening light filtering through our windows painted everything in golden tones that made our small space feel warm and purposeful, exactly the kind of home I'd wanted to build with him. "Tell me about growing up with that kind of wealth," Jake said. "I feel like I'm missing huge pieces of who you are." I curled into the corner of the couch, wine glass balanced on my knees, as I considered how to explain a childhood that had been simultaneously privileged and purposeful. My mother never let money become the most interesting thing about us. We had beautiful homes and traveled extensively, but the focus was always on what we could do for other people, rather than what we could buy for ourselves. "What was your house like? The one in Davidson?" "Enormous and elegant and surprisingly lonely after Mom died. Dad traveled constantly for medical conferences and research projects, so it was mostly just me and the housekeeper, rattling around in rooms that felt designed for entertaining rather than living." Jake listened as I described summers spent volunteering at children's hospitals, Christmas mornings when our family opened gifts quickly so we could spend the day serving meals at homeless shelters, birthday parties where guests brought donations for local charities instead of presents. My mother had been determined that wealth would enhance rather than replace our family's commitment to service. "She sounds extraordinary," Jake said when I finished describing my mother's approach to philanthropy and parenting. "She was. And she would have loved you, not because you're successful or ambitious, but because you make me laugh and support my choices even when they're unconventional. Like choosing to work at a community clinic when I could afford to buy the entire facility. Like choosing to marry for love instead of strategic social advancement." We talked late into the evening, with me sharing stories I'd never told anyone, and Jake asking questions that helped him understand how my background had shaped my values rather than determining them. He was fascinated by my descriptions of foundation board meetings and charity galas, but more interested in how I'd maintained perspective about wealth's proper role in a meaningful life. "I understand now why you were so patient with my family's criticism," he said as we prepared for bed. "You knew their assumptions were wrong, but you also knew that correcting them would change everything about how they related to you. I wanted them to know Emma the nurse practitioner, not Emma the heiress. I wanted authentic relationships based on character, rather than calculated ones based on advantage. And now we find out whether they're capable of growth, or whether they'll just adjust their behavior toward me while maintaining the same shallow values that created problems in the first place. Jake pulled me close as we settled into bed, and I felt the comfort of being fully known by someone who loved me for reasons that had nothing to do with money or status. This was what I'd been protecting when I'd kept my background private. This foundation of genuine connection that couldn't be purchased or influenced by external advantages. But as I drifted towards sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the comfortable anonymity I'd worked so hard to maintain was gone forever, and that the coming days would test not just the Richardson family's capacity for change, but my own ability to navigate relationships where wealth had become a known factor rather than a hidden reality. The next morning brought calls from Ashley and Linda that I let go to voicemail, not because I was avoiding them, but because I needed time to process what had happened before, engaging in conversations that would inevitably focus on recalibrating our relationships. Jake understood my need for space and left for work with promises to handle any family communications that came through him. I arrived at the clinic to find Dr. Chen waiting in my office with coffee and the expression of someone who had news to share. Sarah had been my closest confidant during the months of family tension, and she'd developed an intuitive sense about when I needed extra support. "You look like someone whose world shifted overnight," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Good shift or complicated shift?" "Complicated. Very complicated." I found myself telling Sarah about the hospital revelation and the family's discovery of my background, trusting her with information I'd kept private for years. She listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly letting me process the implications out loud. "So your mother-in-law spent months criticizing you for being a gold digger, when you're actually wealthier than she could have imagined," Sarah said when I finished. The criticism was wrong regardless of my bank account, but yes, the irony is pretty spectacular. "And now you're wondering whether her apology represents genuine growth or just embarrassment at being caught in such obvious misjudgment." Exactly. If Linda starts treating me with respect now, is it because she's learned something important about making assumptions, or because she's learned I have money? Sarah considered this thoughtfully. Maybe the answer will become clear over time. People's motivations reveal themselves through sustained behavior rather than immediate reactions. Her wisdom reminded me why our friendship had become so important. Sarah understood the complexity of navigating relationships where different values and priorities created potential conflicts. And she had the emotional intelligence to see beyond surface responses to underlying character issues. The morning brought its usual stream of patients, each requiring the full attention that made my work both challenging and rewarding. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with Sophia for a routine checkup, and I found myself especially appreciative of the straightforward authenticity of their gratitude and trust. These relationships weren't complicated by wealth or status. They were built on competence, compassion, and mutual respect. Around noon, Jake texted that Ashley had called him 3 times, apparently eager to have a conversation about family dynamics and future relationships. He'd deflected her questions and suggested that any discussions about changed circumstances should include me rather than happening around me, but Ashley's persistence suggested she was struggling to process the implications of what she'd learned. I was reviewing treatment plans when my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice identified herself as Margaret Thompson from Charlotte Magazine. "Ms. Williams, I'm calling about a story we're developing on prominent Charlotte families and their philanthropic impact. We'd love to include information about the Catherine Williams Foundation's current activities and your role in continuing your mother's legacy." My stomach dropped as I realized that word about my identity was already spreading beyond the Richardson family. Hospital corridors weren't private spaces, and Dr. Patterson's recognition of me in front of Jake's family had apparently been noticed by other people as well. "I'm sorry, but I don't give interviews about foundation business," I replied firmly. "All media inquiries should go through our official channels." But surely you'd want to share information about the important work the Foundation continues to do? Our readers would be very interested in learning about your mother's vision and how you're carrying it forward. I ended the call quickly, but the damage was already done. If Charlotte Magazine was calling, other media outlets would follow, and the privacy I'd worked so hard to maintain would become impossible to preserve. The comfortable anonymity that had allowed me to work at the clinic and live modestly was evaporating rapidly. Dr. Chen appeared in my doorway moments later, clearly having overheard enough of the phone conversation to understand what was happening. Media attention? Someone at the hospital yesterday must have mentioned my connection to the Foundation. I should have expected this, but I hoped I'd have more time to figure out how to handle it. Do you want to take the afternoon off? This kind of attention can be overwhelming when you're not prepared for it. I appreciated her offer, but running away wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. My identity was becoming public knowledge whether I wanted it to or not, and I needed to decide how to manage that reality, rather than trying to avoid it. I'll finish the day here. These patients need consistency, and hiding won't make the media attention disappear. The afternoon proceeded normally until around 3 o'clock, when Jake appeared in the clinic waiting room looking simultaneously angry and protective. He approached the reception desk with the determined expression he wore when defending something important to him. "Emma," he said when I emerged from an exam room, "we need to talk. Ashley's been calling local reporters trying to set up interviews about our family's connection to the Williams Foundation." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Ashley wasn't just processing information about my background. She was actively publicizing it, turning my private family history into social capital for the Richardson family's benefit. She what? She called 3 different media outlets this morning, apparently positioning herself as someone who could provide insight into the Foundation's current activities. She mentioned being related by marriage to the Williams family and suggested she could arrange interviews. I stared at Jake, trying to process the magnitude of what Ashley had done. She'd taken information revealed during a family medical crisis and immediately began leveraging it for her own purposes, completely disregarding my obvious preference for privacy. Did she actually arrange any interviews? I don't think so, but only because the reporters want to speak directly with you rather than through intermediaries. Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do something like this. The apology in his voice made my heart ache, because Jake was taking responsibility for his sister's betrayal, even though he had no control over her choices. This was exactly the kind of complication I'd been trying to avoid by keeping my background private, and now it was happening despite my best efforts to maintain boundaries. "I need to call James Mitchell," I said, referring to the family attorney who managed Foundation business and media relations. "If Ashley's contacting reporters, I need to get ahead of this before it becomes a bigger mess." Jake waited while I made the call, his presence offering comfort even as I dealt with the fallout from his sister's impulsive decisions. James listened to my explanation with the calm professionalism that had made him invaluable to our family for years, and he immediately began outlining strategies for managing unwanted media attention. "I can have our PR firm issue a statement requesting privacy for your personal life while directing media inquiries about Foundation business to appropriate channels," he offered. "That should minimize intrusion while protecting your ability to work and live normally. Thank you." And James? "If any reporters mention getting information from Ashley Richardson, please make it clear that she's not authorized to speak for the Foundation or the Williams family." After ending the call, I sat quietly for a moment, processing the reality that my carefully maintained privacy was disappearing rapidly due to circumstances beyond my control. The revelation of my identity to Jake's family had been accidental, but Ashley's decision to publicize that information represented a deliberate betrayal of trust. "Emma," Jake said carefully, "I think we need to have a serious conversation with my family about boundaries and respect. Ashley had no right to share information about your background with reporters. Your sister sees my family's prominence as an opportunity for social advancement. She's always been focused on status and connections, and now she's discovered she has access to both through me. That doesn't excuse what she did. Family information should stay private unless you choose to share it." I appreciated Jake's anger on my behalf, but I also recognized that this crisis represented a larger issue than Ashley's poor judgment. The Richardson family's discovery of my background would inevitably change how they related to me, and some of those changes would be positive while others would create new complications. "We should probably go see your mother this evening," I said finally. If Ashley's talking to reporters, Linda needs to understand that foundation business is private family matter, not public information for anyone connected to us to share. Jake nodded grimly. "And I need to have a very direct conversation with Ashley about appropriate behavior and respect for your privacy." The rest of my workday passed in a blur of patient care mixed with anxiety about media attention and family dynamics. Each phone call made me wonder if another reporter was trying to reach me, and each interaction with colleagues left me questioning whether they'd seen my name mentioned in connection with the foundation. Dr. Chen found me updating charts at the end of the day and settled into the chair beside my desk with the purposeful air that indicated she wanted to address something important. "Emma, whatever happens with media attention or family complications, you should know that your work here has value that exists completely independent of your background. The patients you serve don't care about your family's wealth. They care about your skill and compassion." Her words reminded me why I'd chosen this work in the first place, and why maintaining my position at the clinic mattered more than managing external complications. These relationships with patients and colleagues represented the authentic connections I'd been protecting when I kept my background private. Thank you for saying that. I've been worried that everything will change now that people know about my family. Some things will change, but the important things don't have to. You're still the same person who chose to work with underserved populations instead of chasing prestige. You're still the same colleague who stays late to help families navigate insurance problems. That's who you are, regardless of what your trust fund looks like. Sarah's perspective helped ground me as Jake and I prepared to face the Richardson family that evening. Whatever conversations lay ahead, whatever adjustments we needed to make to account for changed circumstances, the core of who I was and what I valued remained constant. The question now was whether the Richardson family would prove capable of seeing beyond wealth to appreciate character, or whether my background would simply create new forms of complication in relationships that had already been tested by months of misunderstanding and misdirected criticism. The drive to the hospital that evening felt different from our previous visits. Jake's jaw was set with the kind of determination that appeared when he'd reached the end of his patience with family drama, and I could sense him preparing for difficult conversations about boundaries and respect. The revelation of my background had created an opportunity for his family to reevaluate their treatment of me, but Ashley's immediate decision to contact reporters had demonstrated exactly why I'd been cautious about sharing personal information. Linda looked significantly better than she had the day before, sitting up in bed with more color in her cheeks and alert attention that suggested her recovery was progressing well. She greeted us with genuine warmth, though I noticed her studying my face, with the careful observation of someone still processing new information about my identity and circumstances. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Jake asked, settling into the bedside chair with the easy familiarity of someone who'd spent considerable time in hospital rooms recently. "Much better, thank you. The doctors are pleased with my progress, and they think I'll be able to go home tomorrow if my test results continue to look good." Ashley arrived 20 minutes later carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers and wearing the bright smile she used when she wanted to project cheerful confidence. But I caught the guilty flicker in her eyes when she looked at me, suggesting she was aware that her reporter contacts had been discovered and reported back to us. "Emma," Ashley said with forced casualness, "I hope you don't mind, but I've been thinking about how exciting it must be for our family to be connected to such an important Charlotte institution. The Williams Foundation does such incredible work." Jake's expression darkened immediately. "Ashley, we need to talk about that. Emma's family information isn't public property for you to share with anyone who's interested." "I wasn't sharing private information," Ashley protested. "I was just mentioning our family connection when reporters called asking about foundation activities." "Reporters didn't call you randomly," I said quietly. "You called them first, trying to arrange interviews and position yourself as someone who could provide access to foundation information." The accusation hung in the air between us, and I watched Ashley's face cycle through surprise, defensiveness, and finally grudging acknowledgement that her behavior had been inappropriate. Linda was following this conversation with growing concern, clearly realizing that family dynamics were becoming more complicated rather than less so. "Ashley," Linda said firmly, "did you actually contact reporters about Emma's family?" "I thought it might be good publicity for the foundation," Ashley replied weakly. and I thought it would help people understand what an accomplished person Jake married. You thought it would be good publicity for yourself, Jake corrected bluntly. You saw an opportunity to elevate your social status by associating yourself with Emma's family's prominence. Ashley's face flushed, but she didn't deny the accusation. I realized that this conversation was revealing fundamental character issues that went beyond simple poor judgment, and that Ashley's reaction to learning about my background was exactly what I'd feared when I'd kept that information private. Emma, Linda said carefully, I'm very sorry if Ashley's actions have created problems for you. That wasn't appropriate, and it won't happen again. It's already happening, I replied. 3 different media outlets have contacted me today, and more will follow. The privacy I've worked to maintain is disappearing whether I want it to or not. But Emma, Ashley interjected, surely you want people to know about the amazing work your family does. The foundation has such a positive impact on the community. The foundation's work speaks for itself, through the programs it supports and the lives it affects. It doesn't need publicity from people who aren't authorized to speak for it. Ashley looked genuinely confused by my response, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would prefer privacy over public recognition for charitable work. Her confusion revealed the fundamental difference in our values and priorities, and helped explain why she'd immediately seen my background as an opportunity for social advancement rather than private family information to be respected. Linda was watching this exchange with obvious discomfort, clearly recognizing that her daughter's behavior was reflecting poorly on the family's character and judgment. She'd spent years teaching Ashley about appropriate social behavior, but apparently hadn't adequately emphasized the importance of respecting other people's privacy and boundaries. Ashley, Linda said with unusual firmness, you need to contact those reporters immediately and explain that you made a mistake. Tell them you're not authorized to speak about foundation business, and refer all future inquiries to official channels. But Mom, this could be such a great opportunity for our family to be associated with important charitable work. Our family is already associated with important work through Emma's marriage to Jake, Linda interrupted. We don't need to publicize that connection to benefit from it, and we certainly don't have the right to use Emma's private information for our own purposes. Jake was nodding approvingly at his mother's response, clearly relieved that she was taking appropriate action to address Ashley's poor judgment. But I could see Ashley struggling to understand why her enthusiasm about my background was being treated as problematic rather than supportive. Emma, Ashley said directly, I really was just trying to help. I thought you'd be proud to have people know about your family's contributions to the community. I am proud of my mother's work and the foundation's impact, I replied. But I'm also entitled to privacy about my personal life and family history. Sharing that information should be my choice, not yours. I understand that now. I'm sorry I overstepped. Ashley's apology sounded sincere, but I wasn't convinced she truly understood the principle involved, rather than simply recognizing that her actions had caused problems. Her immediate impulse to publicize my background suggested a fundamental misunderstanding about the difference between public and private information. Linda was studying both her children with the expression of someone reassessing family dynamics in light of new information. I think we all need to take some time to process what we've learned and figure out how to move forward in a way that respects everyone's needs and boundaries. That's exactly what I was hoping we could do, I agreed. This revelation doesn't have to change everything about our relationships, but it does require adjustments in how we handle certain kinds of information. Bob arrived as we were finishing this conversation, carrying the tired but relieved expression of someone whose major worry had been resolved. Linda's improved health clearly meant everything to him, and the complicated family dynamic seemed secondary to his gratitude for her recovery. Dad, Jake said after updating him on Linda's medical progress, we need to fill you in on some family business that's developed since yesterday. Bob listened carefully as Jake explained Ashley's contact with reporters and the need for better boundaries around sharing information about my background. His reaction was immediate disapproval of Ashley's behavior, combined with obvious embarrassment that his daughter had acted so inappropriately. Ashley, that wasn't your information to share, he said bluntly. Emma's entitled to privacy about her family, and you had no right to contact reporters without her permission. I know that now, Dad. I've already apologized and I'll fix it. Bob turned to me with the direct attention he gave to important business matters. Emma, I'm sorry my daughter created problems for you. That won't happen again. His straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to preventing future issues carried more weight than Ashley's elaborate explanations and defensive justifications. Bob understood accountability in ways that Ashley was still learning, and his response helped reassure me that at least some members of Jake's family could be trusted with sensitive information. The conversation shifted to Linda's discharge plans and recovery requirements, but I could feel the family processing new dynamics and expectations that would influence our relationships going forward. Ashley remained subdued for the rest of the visit, clearly chastened by the unanimous disapproval of her behavior. Linda seemed thoughtful and determined to handle future situations more appropriately. During the drive home, Jake expressed satisfaction with his parents' responses and frustration with Ashley's continued focus on social advantages rather than personal relationships. "Mom and Dad get it," he said. "They understand that this is about respecting you as a person, not about managing your background for maximum family benefit. Your mother's apology yesterday felt genuine, and her response to Ashley's behavior tonight reinforced that. I think she's capable of real growth if she's willing to examine her assumptions and priorities. And Ashley sees my background as an opportunity rather than understanding it as information that requires respect and discretion. That's a harder problem to solve because it involves fundamental values rather than just changed circumstances." Jake nodded grimly. Ashley's always been focused on status and appearances. Learning about your wealth probably looks like validation of her worldview rather than a challenge to examine her priorities. Which means we'll need to be very clear about boundaries and expectations going forward. I can't have family members treating my background as their ticket to social advancement. We spent the evening discussing practical strategies for managing media attention and family dynamics in the coming weeks. James Mitchell's PR firm would handle official communications about foundation business, while we would need to establish clear guidelines for family members about what information could and couldn't be shared with outsiders. The next morning brought a call from Linda, who was being discharged from the hospital and wanted to thank me again for my help with insurance advocacy and medical coordination. Her tone was warmer than it had been in months, but I detected an underlying uncertainty about how to navigate our changed relationship. "Emma," Linda said carefully, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize I have a lot to learn about being a better mother-in-law to you." "I appreciate that, Linda. What matters most to me is building authentic relationships based on mutual respect and understanding." "I want that too. I also want you to know that I've spoken with Ashley again this morning about appropriate behavior regarding your family information. She understands that she made a serious mistake. Thank you for addressing that directly. Going forward, I'd appreciate if all family members could check with Jake or me before sharing any information about my background or family business. Of course, we'll be much more thoughtful about respecting your privacy." Linda's commitment to better behavior sounded genuine, and her willingness to have difficult conversations with Ashley demonstrated that she was taking responsibility for family dynamics, rather than just apologizing for past mistakes. This gave me hope that we could build a more positive relationship based on mutual respect rather than assumptions and criticisms. The call ended with plans for a family dinner the following weekend, where we could continue working on improved communication and understanding. Linda wanted to celebrate her recovery and also mark what she described as a new beginning for our family relationships. I agreed to the dinner with cautious optimism, recognizing that real change would require sustained effort from everyone involved, rather than just good intentions expressed during crisis situations. But Linda's response to Ashley's behavior and her commitment to better boundaries suggested that growth was possible if she remained willing to examine her assumptions and priorities. Dr. Chen found me reviewing patient charts that afternoon and immediately noticed my improved mood. "You look like someone whose family crisis is resolving in positive directions." "Maybe." Linda seems genuinely committed to change, and Jake's father has been very direct about appropriate behavior. "It's Ashley who worries me." "The sister-in-law who contacted reporters?" "She's apologized, but I'm not convinced she understands why her behavior was wrong, rather than just recognizing that it caused problems. She seems to view my background as an opportunity for social advancement, rather than private information that requires respect." Sarah considered this thoughtfully. Some people need more time and experience to understand principles rather than just consequences. Maybe Ashley will learn through watching how other family members handle this appropriately. Maybe. Or maybe she'll find more subtle ways to leverage my background for her own purposes. Either way, you'll know how to handle it. You've managed this whole situation with remarkable grace and wisdom. Her confidence in my ability to navigate family complications helped strengthen my resolve about maintaining appropriate boundaries, while giving people opportunities to demonstrate growth and change. The revelation of my background had created challenges, but it had also created opportunities for more authentic relationships, based on complete information, rather than partial assumptions. The afternoon brought its usual stream of patients, each requiring attention and care that reminded me why my work mattered regardless of external complications. Mrs. Rodriguez brought Sophia for a follow-up appointment, and their easy gratitude and trust provided a welcome contrast to the complexity of family dynamics and media attention. As I prepared to leave the clinic that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days and how much had remained constant. My identity as a nurse practitioner committed to serving underserved populations hadn't changed, even though people's awareness of my background had shifted dramatically. My marriage to Jake remained strong and supportive, even as we navigated new challenges related to family dynamics and public attention. The strategic response I'd begun implementing seemed appropriate for protecting what mattered most while allowing relationships to evolve in positive directions where possible. Clear boundaries about privacy and information sharing would prevent future problems like Ashley's reporter contacts, while Linda's apparent commitment to growth offered hope for more respectful family interactions. Whether these changes would prove sustainable remained to be seen, but I felt confident about my ability to handle whatever developments emerged. The foundation of values and priorities that had guided my choices throughout this situation remained solid, providing stability as external circumstances continued to shift and evolve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.